The desperate plea. Nexus Prime Council Chamber. The Draconus would soon be extinct. Every race in the Galactic Council sneered as they shunned their desperate pleas for aid against the Void Swarm's merciless onslaught. Every race except one. The humans. James Allen strode into the immense council chamber on Nexus Prime, the murmurs of 100 alien tongues washing over him. Insectoid cilia clicked their mandibles, crystalline vorks glittered under the lights, and at the center podium, the reptilian Draconus delegation trembled with rage and dread. High Priest Primus desperation. High Priest Primus slammed a clawed fist on the lectern. The Void Swarm has already devoured 3 colony worlds. It now hurtles toward Draconus Prime, an all-consuming darkness that will feast on our billions. Council's indifference. The council members shifted in their seats. A willowy Ameri counselor spoke, her melodic voice edged with ice. We cannot spare our forces for a foe we don't understand. This is your war, not ours. James' commitment. James watched, appalled, as the votes tallied. The council had abandoned the Draconus to extinction. Primus slumped, his scales ashen gray, devastated. The delegation trudged from the chamber as the counselors looked away. James ran to catch the high priest outside the doors. He gripped Primus' shoulder. Earth will not desert you in your darkest hour. No matter the cost, humanity will stand with the Draconus against the Void Swarm. This I vow. The stakes. Primus' eyes glimmered with the tiniest ember of hope. Earth's technology lagged far behind the council races. If the humans joined this fight, it could mean their own demise. The Void Swarm had to be stopped here, or it would surge onward to devour world after world, humanity included. The stakes could not be higher. The survival of the Draconus, the humans, and the entire galaxy hung by a fraying thread. Failure was not an option. Rallying the humans. United Earth Council Chamber. James burst into the United Earth Council Chamber, his heart pounding. Every seat was filled, a sea of stern faces illuminated by the holoscreens flickering with data. At the center podium, Secretary Alvarez regarded James with a raised eyebrow. Ambassador Allen, I trust you have a good reason for this unscheduled interruption. The appeal. James took a deep breath. The words poured out of him, urgent and unfiltered. He described the Void Swarm's unstoppable advance, the world's already lost, and the Draconus' desperate plea for aid at the Galactic Council, callously rejected. We can't abandon them to extinction. What does it say about us as a species if we let an entire civilization die when we could have helped? After everything we've been through, all the wars and suffering, we finally have a chance to be a force for good in the galaxy. The debate. Councilwoman Yuan frowned. You're asking us to involve Earth in an interstellar war we know nothing about. We're still rebuilding from our own conflicts. The loss of ships and personnel could set us back decades. Shouts of agreement echoed through the chamber. James slammed his fist on the lectern, his voice rising over the din. This is bigger than just us. If the Void Swarm isn't stopped at Draconus Prime, how long until it reaches Earth? We'd be fighting them alone. And even if we're spared, what does it say about our principles if we just watch them die? Everything we've done, all our progress, means nothing if we turn our backs on others in need. The decision. Silence fell. James saw doubt melt into grim resolve on the counselors' faces. Secretary Alvarez straightened, meeting James' gaze. We will put it to a vote. All in favor of sending a fleet to aid the Draconus. One by one, hands rose. It was unanimous. James sagged with relief, barely registering Alvarez's next words. Ambassador Allen, you will serve as lead diplomat on this mission. Report to Admiral Briggs for departure. And Godspeed. Preparing for battle. The launch bay. The launch bay buzzed with activity as James strode across the tarmac. Mechanics swarmed over the gleaming ships, running final checks. Admiral Briggs emerged from the command shuttle, his weathered face grim. Allen, I won't mince words. We're heading into the unknown against a threat we barely comprehend. There's no guarantee any of us will make it back. Acknowledging the risks, James met Briggs' piercing stare. I know the risks, Admiral, but we're doing the right thing. We have to try. Briggs grunted. I hope you're right, for all our sakes. He clapped James on the shoulder before heading back inside. Departure. James stood on the observation deck as the fleet rose through the atmosphere. Earth shrank beneath them, blue and green and achingly beautiful. His stomach churned with nerves, but beneath it, a flicker of hope. They were on their way. Humanity was taking its first step into a larger universe, not as conquerors but as defenders. The weight of an entire species' survival pressed down on him, but James straightened his shoulders, ready to bear it. The stars beckoned, and the fleet chased the light. Arrival at Draconus Prime. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the swirling vortex collapsing behind them as Draconus Prime loomed ahead. James stood on the bridge of the command ship, jaw set as he took in the planet's mottled green surface, marred by angry red scars where the void swarm had already struck. The call for aid. As they entered orbit, a hail from the surface crackled over the comms. High Priest Primus' face resolved on the view screen, his scales dull with exhaustion. Ambassador Allen, your arrival brings us hope in our darkest hour. James inclined his head. We're here to help in any way we can, High Priest. My people are at your disposal. Primus' relief was palpable even through the screen. Come down to the surface. We have much to discuss. Defending Draconus Prime. Ground forces. The human delegation touched down outside the Draconus capital, a once grand city now fortified with hastily erected barriers and thrumming with nervous energy. Primus greeted them at the landing pad, flanked by a contingent of battle-scarred warriors. As they walked through the war-torn streets, James couldn't help but notice the weary glances the Draconus soldiers cast their way. He couldn't blame them for their skepticism. After all, the rest of the galaxy had abandoned them to their fate. War Room. In the war room, James huddled with Primus and the Draconus generals, poring over holomaps of the planet's defenses. The more he learned about the Void Swarm, the greater the pit of dread grew in his stomach. They adapt, Primus said grimly. Every tactic we employ, every weakness we exploit, they learn and evolve to counter it. It's like fighting a single malevolent intelligence. Hive mind. James frowned. A hive mind. Primus nodded. We believe so, which makes them all the more dangerous. Uneasy feelings. As the days passed and the human and Draconus forces worked to shore up the planet's defenses, James couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the Council's refusal to help than mere indifference. The pieces just didn't fit. Unexpected arrival. His suspicions were confirmed when a sleek silver ship bearing the Council's emblem landed without warning at the capital spaceport. James and Admiral Briggs were summoned to an emergency meeting, where they found themselves face to face with a tall, slender alien with piercing violet eyes. Council Envoy. I am Zoral, the envoy said, his voice smooth as silk. I come bearing a message from the Galactic Council. James crossed his arms. I thought the Council wanted nothing to do with this conflict. Zoral smiled thinly. Circumstances have changed, Ambassador Allen. The Council has been monitoring the Void Swarm for some time, and we have reason to believe they are not acting alone. The Caith? Briggs leaned forward. What do you mean? We believe the swarm is being controlled by the Kith, an ancient race that once ruled the galaxy. They vanished eons ago, but it seems they may have returned to reclaim their former dominance. James felt a chill run down his spine. Why tell us this now? Zoral's gaze hardened. Because, Ambassador, the Council will not tolerate any interference in what we consider an internal galactic matter. You and your fleet are to withdraw immediately. Refusing to withdraw, James slammed his hand on the table. We can't abandon the Draconus. We gave our word. Then you doom not only them, but your own people as well. Zoril hissed. "The Council has the power to make your lives very difficult. Ambassador, think carefully about your next move." With that, the envoy swept from the room, leaving James and Briggs in stunned silence. Briggs ran a hand over his face. "What do we do now?" James set his jaw. "We keep fighting. We didn't come all this way to turn tail and run." But even as he said the words, James knew their task had just become infinitely harder. They now faced not only the Void Swarm, but potentially the full might of the Galactic Council as well. The fate of the Draconus, and perhaps the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. James could only pray they were up to the challenge. The battle begins. The Void Swarm arrives. The sky over Draconus Prime turned black as the Void Swarm descended, a churning mass of jagged metal and pulsing energy. On the surface, James stood beside Primus in the command center, his face bathed in the sickly glow of the holoscreens. "They're coming in fast," James said, his voice tight. "Admiral Briggs, what's your status?" The Admiral's face appeared on the screen, grim and determined. "We're in position, Ambassador, ready to engage on your command." "Engaging the enemy." James nodded. "Give them hell, Admiral." The human fleet tore into the swarm, their weapons cutting swaths of destruction through the seething mass. But for every ship they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place, the swarm adapting and evolving before their eyes. Ground battle. On the ground, the Draconus forces fought with the fury of a cornered animal, their claws and teeth ripping into the swarm's grotesque foot soldiers. James and Primus coordinated the defense, dispatching reinforcements to the front lines and shoring up the city's failing shields. For a moment, it seemed as though they might turn the tide. The human fleet was holding its own, and the Draconus were slowly pushing the swarm back from the city walls. James allowed himself a flicker of hope. Council fleet arrival. And then the Council fleet arrived. They dropped out of hyperspace like avenging angels, their ships sleek and deadly. At their head was Zoril's flagship, a needle of silver that glinted in the light of the burning city. "Ambassador Allen," Zoril's voice crackled over the comms, dripping with disdain. "You have defied the Council for the last time. Surrender now or face the consequences." The 0-point weapons. James gripped the edge of the console, his knuckles white. He looked to Primus, saw the despair in the High Priest's eyes. They both knew they couldn't fight a war on two fronts. But then James remembered the 0-point weapons, the experimental technology that Earth had been developing in secret. It was untested, highly unstable, but it might be their only chance. The plan. He opened a channel to Admiral Briggs. "Admiral, I have an idea, but it's risky." Briggs' face was etched with weariness, but his eyes were steel. "At this point, I'm open to anything." James laid out his plan, watching as Briggs' expression shifted from skepticism to grim understanding. "It's a one-way trip," Briggs said quietly. "Whoever leads that assault isn't coming back." James swallowed hard. "I know. I'll do it." But Briggs was already shaking his head. "No, the Draconus need you here, coordinating the defense. This is a job for a soldier, not a diplomat." He straightened his shoulders. "I'll lead the attack." James wanted to argue, but he knew Briggs was right. He clasped the Admiral's hand, feeling the weight of unspoken words between them. "Godspeed, Admiral." Final battle. As Briggs' fleet peeled away, streaking towards the heart of the swarm, James turned to Primus. "We need to buy them time. Can your forces hold the Council at bay?" Primus bared his teeth in a fierce grin. "We will fight to our last breath." What followed was a battle unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The Draconus threw themselves at the Council fleet with reckless abandon, their ships swarming Zoril's flagship like angry hornets. In the heart of the swarm, Briggs and his team fought their way to the center, planting the 0-point charges with grim efficiency. And then, in a blinding flash of light, it was over. The singularity tore through the swarm, ripping it apart from the inside out. The void ships crumpled like tin cans, their dying screams echoing across the battlefield. But the victory had come at a terrible price. Briggs and his fleet were gone, consumed by the very singularity they had created. Aftermath. The surviving human ships limped back to the surface, their hulls scorched and battered. In the aftermath, a stunned Zor-El agreed to a truce, his arrogance shattered by the magnitude of the human sacrifice. James stood amidst the ruins of the Draconus capital, numb with grief and exhaustion. Primus laid a clawed hand on his shoulder. "Your people have given us a future," the high priest said softly. "We will never forget what you have done here." James nodded, too choked with emotion to speak. He thought of Earth, of the rebuild that awaited them. And he thought of Briggs, of the countless others who had laid down their lives for a cause greater than themselves. Rebuilding and uncovering secrets. The rebuild. The years after the Battle of Draconus Prime were a blur of activity. Sleep was a luxury James couldn't afford as he threw himself into the monumental task of rebuilding Earth's shattered fleet. Late nights spent poring over schematics and supply chains left him bleary-eyed and exhausted, but he couldn't stop. Too much was riding on their success. Draconus support. The Draconus, true to their word, proved invaluable allies. Transports bearing their advanced technology and resources arrived daily, providing the raw materials Earth so desperately needed. James worked hand in hand with their engineers, marveling at the elegance of their designs as they collaborated on new ships and weapons. Tensions in the galaxy. But even as they made progress, James could feel the undercurrents of tension rippling through the galaxy. The scars of the war were still raw, and not everyone was happy with the new balance of power. He saw it in the sidelong glances and whispered conversations at diplomatic functions, the barely concealed resentment in the eyes of certain council members as they watched humanity's star rise. Uncovering the truth. It all came to a head when James uncovered the truth about the Void Swarm. Late one night, hunched over a data pad in his quarters, he stumbled across an encrypted file buried deep within the Council's archives. What he found made his blood run cold. The swarm wasn't a relic of some long-forgotten race. It was a weapon created by a shadowy cable within the Council itself. They called themselves the Shadow Council, and they had been pulling the strings of galactic events for centuries, orchestrating wars, and suppressing any who threatened their power. Rallying allies. James leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. The Void Swarm, the war, all the death and destruction. It had all been part of their plan, a way to wipe out any race that dared challenge their authority. He knew then that the fight was far from over. The Battle of Draconus Prime had been just the beginning. If the Shadow Council wasn't stopped, the cycle of war and manipulation would continue until there was nothing left but ash and ruin. Mobilizing forces, he called in every favor, rallied every ally he had made over the years. The Draconus were the first to answer, their ships forming an honor guard around their growing fleet. Other races, those who had seen the truth of the Council's corruption, soon followed. Together, they launched a series of daring raids and covert operations, striking at the heart of the Shadow Council's power. They hit their supply lines, exposed their agents, slowly unraveling the web of influence they had spun across the galaxy. The cost of victory. But each victory came with a cost. Too many friends, too many brave souls were lost in the fight. James still remembered the day Primus fell, throwing himself in front of a Shadow Council assassin's blade meant for him. He died in James' arms, his blood mingling with James' tears as he begged him to stay with him. The new beginning. Defeating the Shadow Council. In the end, they won. The Shadow Council was defeated, their leaders brought to justice before the assembled races of the galaxy. But as James stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, watching as a new generation of leaders took their seats, he couldn't help but feel the weight of all they had lost. The galaxy had changed, the old alliances and power structures lying in ruins. They had won the war, but the scars it left behind would take generations to heal. Hope for the future. He looked out at the sea of faces, Draconus and human and 100 other races, and he saw the same weariness, the same grief that he felt in his own heart. But he also saw hope. He saw it in the eyes of the young, the idealists who had taken up the mantle of leadership. They believed in a better future, a galaxy free from the cycle of war and oppression. And as he watched them, he felt a flicker of that same hope kindle in his own chest. The legacy. They had fought so hard, sacrificed so much, to reach this moment. The brave soldiers of the human fleet, the steadfast warriors of the Draconus, the countless unsung heroes who had given their lives in the shadows. Their sacrifice had to mean something. James looked out at the stars, at the infinite possibilities that lay before them, and he made a silent vow. He would spend the rest of his days fighting to make their dream a reality, a galaxy of peace, of unity, of hope. It would be his legacy, and the legacy of all those who had fallen. The road ahead. The road ahead would be long and hard, the scars of the past not easily erased. But as James stood there, surrounded by the glimmering lights of 1,000 worlds, he knew one thing for certain. The future was worth fighting for. And fight for it they would, until their last breath, and beyond. Conclusion. The story of humanity's fight alongside the Draconus against the Void Swarm and the Shadow Council had become a legend, a testament to the strength, resilience, and determination of the human spirit. It was a story that would be told for generations to come, inspiring hope and courage in the hearts of all who heard it. And as James looked out at the stars, he knew that their adventure was far from over. There were still countless challenges to face, new worlds to explore, and a galaxy to rebuild. But with the lessons they had learned and the bonds they had forged, they were ready for whatever lay ahead.